Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this Kendall Hunt webinar, Strategies for Cultivating Resilience in Your College Classroom. So with everything that impacts mental and emotional health with college students today, how do we enhance engagement, foster resilience, and promote just general overall well-being? That is what we'll be discussing today. But before we jump in, just to cover a couple of housekeeping tips, this webinar is being recorded. You'll receive access to that in the coming days. We will be taking questions at the end of the webinar, but if you have a question, please feel free at any time to put those in either the chat function or the Q&A, and then we'll address those at the end. Now to introduce our speakers today, we have Kelly Rosetta with us. She is a professor of communication at Boise State University, and she's faculty director for GradWell, Be Well, Do Well. Her research is on resilience process in interpersonal relationships with a focus on coping and support related to college student mental health and in military families. You can find her work in several places, including Communication Monographs, Communication Education, and Journal of Social and Personal Relationships. She also co-edited Social Media in Close Relationships, as well as author Journey into College and Career with us, Kendall Hunt. Now, Eric with us today, Eric Martin, he's an associate professor in the kinesiology department, also at Boise State University, and he's co-director of the Center for Physical Activity and Sport. His research focuses on youth sports, specifically motivation, burnout, positive youth development, athlete activism, and building resilience in both sporting and non-sporting college student populations. He's also a certified mental performance consultant, and he consults in sports and other performance contexts with individuals and teams in the middle school, high school, collegiate, and professional levels. And he also is co-author of Journey into College and Career. Now, without further ado, I will turn it over to our esteemed guest today. We're very excited to have you with us. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Megan. I really appreciate that. Thank you all for joining us. We're really excited to be talking through. And so I think one thing that we can start going or kind of start the session with is really thinking through of what do we hope to accomplish or what do we hope to engage you with today. And so what we want to try to give you as you take an hour out of your time today is really thinking through of what are some of the mental health challenges for college age students that we have today. I'm sure you've all seen things in your classrooms, you've seen things with your interactions with these individuals. And so understanding those is really the first step towards moving to helping them in those challenges that they experience. We also want to start thinking through of how do we apply resilience-based approaches to really support well-being in their lives, not only in the classrooms, but just globally as well. And so we want to start thinking more in a positive framework where we're really saying, how can we develop those resilience-based strategies so that they can start using them in their own life? And ideally, what we hope you get out of this as you leave is some practical strategies to implement, maybe not right now, but in the next semester and the next semesters as they're coming, so that you can start thinking about how to really move forward with them. Before we get going in content, though, and really overviewing this, I'd like to invite you to engage in just a brief mindfulness exercise. And so sometimes Kelly or I start classes with this way, with what we like to call as a soft landing. And so trying to get people from moving from a very busy, maybe professional or personal life to really this next context, whatever that may be. Now, in our own context, it's usually something like our classrooms or the class content. Maybe you do this before your lab meetings or before faculty meetings, but it's really a way of moving from a very busy, chaotic, maybe overwhelming environment to think through of what do we want to accomplish and how do we engage with this next area of our life as we're here for the next 30 or 45 minutes. So I invite you to just find a comfortable position, really being mindful of what your body is feeling in this moment and how that feels for you as we currently are. For many, this may be sitting tall like a mountain, back straight, arms resting at your sides, feet firmly planted on the ground. But I want you to find whatever feels right in this moment. When you find that spot, I invite you to just close your eyes and take some deep breaths. As you go through this, notice how you are breathing, the in and the out. And just notice that, not trying to change anything, but just experiencing that breathing. Feel the coolness of the breath as you inhale and the warmth of your breath as you exhale. As you breathe, give yourself permission to leave your past worries and your responsibilities behind and focus just on that breathing. Imagine yourself stepping out of the doing that you've been engaged in, away from what's going on in the world, away from work, maybe student demands, away from all those things that are on your plate at this current moment. With your breath, I want you to think about you carving out space just for you. This space is a peaceful space, a kind space, and a space where you can safely go. Continue to focus on your breathing, breathing in and breathing out. As you're breathing in the space you've created for yourself, you may find that certain thoughts or certain emotions arise. Maybe they're worries about the semester, things that are weighing on you, responsibilities, regrets, self-criticism, or even doubts. When this happens, and it ultimately will, rather than trying to push that thought or feeling away, simply just notice it without judgment. Try not to get caught up in it, but acknowledge it's there and then release it. Let it float away as you gently bring your attention back to your breath. As you're breathing in and out, see if you can kindle a feeling of warmth and kindness towards yourself. For some people, this helps by placing their hand over their heart and really take a moment to appreciate your own self, just as you are in this moment. Many of us find it easy to love ourselves when things are going well, but when we make mistakes, when we're feeling overwhelmed, when we're not where we think we should be, when we're in the midst of many deadlines and things to do, we often fall back into patterns that involve negative self-talk. We can beat ourselves up for our perceived failures and shortcomings. We sometimes judge ourselves harshly. In those moments, it can be helpful to stop and ask, what would I tell a loved one if they were criticizing themselves like this? So often, we are much harder on ourselves than we are for others. We have to remind ourselves that we deserve kindness as well. When those negative voices start up, we can counter them with self-compassion, treating ourselves kindly and gently, just like we would want to treat a friend or how we would want our friends to treat us. Continue to breathe, allowing the warmth of compassion and acceptance and loving awareness to fill you up and infuse your whole body. As self-compassion researcher and teacher Dr. Kristen Neff says, when we give ourselves compassion, we're opening our hearts in a way that can transform our lives. Now, when you're ready, open your eyes and see if you can bring that focus, that loving kindness, and everything else for the rest of the session and the rest of the day. When we do an exercise like that in class, we would really want to debrief it and see how people were feeling before and after. We won't have time to do that today, but I think that's a really nice element to lead into some of the challenges that our college students are facing. The first thing we need to really acknowledge about their experience is that the college environment is really stressful. They're sometimes moving from out of state or out of country. They're leaving social support networks, even if they're within the same state or within the same city. They're developing new friendships, which sometimes is very stressful. They're engaging in very challenging classes, maybe for the first time, depending on their academic environment. And so I think the first thing to really think of is this environment is highly stressful. In fact, in a 2021 survey, over the past 12 months, 3/4 of students said they experienced 3 or more life events that were traumatic and very difficult to handle. 58% said they were feeling overwhelming anxiety sometime in the last 12 months. 65% reported feeling very sad, and 37% reporting feeling so depressed it was difficult to function. You've probably seen some of these students in your classrooms or your interactions. And so just understanding students are experiencing stress and they're experiencing these challenges, I think is a really important element. Now, I think it's also really important to acknowledge that not everyone is experiencing those challenges in the same way. I like to tell my students we're all in the same storm, but we're all in very different boats. Some people have financial resources that help them overcome some of these. Sometimes they have very supportive networks. Maybe they find supportive networks where they go. And so each of our students are experiencing these challenges in much different ways. And we need to understand some of them are going to be able to cope with them much easier than someone else who doesn't have those challenges or doesn't have those resources who are there. Now, unfortunately, we know this mental health crisis is leading to pretty negative outcomes for our students. Those individuals who are having those mental health challenges feel lower social connection, both with their peers, their faculty, and the university as a whole. They feel like they have lower overall well-being, and they have decreased academic performance, largely because they feel disconnected and they have lower levels of well-being. This can impact their retention rates as well. We know the stats that nearly 30% of students do not return to college after their first year. And even of those students, 25% of those ones who do make it past their first year may not attain their degree as they move through that process. These challenges are leading to consequences. And so we need to start thinking about how can we help our students? How can we help them engage in the way that we really want them to so they can be more successful moving forward?
Thanks, Eric, for setting the stage for us. And Eric and I really, based on the statistics that we've seen about college students and after working with college students for a lot of years, really wanted to dedicate our time and our work to developing a promising approach to reaching college students, engaging college students, and really impacting their well-being. And we wanted to come at this from a strengths-based perspective. And so we've dedicated our time to really thinking about how can we incorporate strengths-based activities and outlooks into the classroom environment. This isn't that we need to change our content. This isn't that we need to teach resilience per se, but rather we can reach students in our everyday practices. And when we talk about resilience, we're really talking about a process through which people can overcome challenge, bounce back, and actively reconstruct their normal. And in order to do this, we need to help students, and we ourselves need to balance risk and protective factors. And to do so in class, we like to think about this as creating a facilitative environment where we recognize that there's high challenge for students and that students are experiencing a lot of challenges inside and outside of their schoolwork. But we can also have a high level of support. And so in this, we're creating a facilitative environment. Many people, I think, push back on the idea of well-being in the classroom to say that perhaps we might be coddling our students or we're making things a little bit too comfortable. And in the real world, things are not comfortable. And we recognize that. And that's absolutely true. So it isn't always that everything needs to be perfectly comfortable, where there's no challenge in the course and no deadlines, all flexibility all the time. That's not what we're talking about. There's time and a place for that, but then there's also that time and the place to create the facilitative environment, but avoiding that unrelenting environment where the challenges are super high, but there's no support offered. So through Eric and I's research and with the use of Buzzanell's communication processes of resilience, we've developed this strength-based perspective on supporting college student resilience. And so based on Buzzanell's 5 communicative processes of resilience, legitimizing negative feelings while foregrounding productive action, affirming identity anchors, utilizing social networks, crafting normalcy, and finding alternative logics, we talked with many student support leaders. We did a qualitative analysis, which you can find in our publication in Communication Education. And and so when we were analyzing our data and looking at these processes, we found that many of them work together. And so we talked about how can we support students in their resilience and in getting to these communicative processes of resilience? And so when we thought about how these combine, and you can see how the circles are touching each other here, we talk about reflecting and finding strengths. And this involves really empowering students to advocate for themselves, find their own strengths, and utilize reflection in order to reach this kind of process. And this can involve identity affirmation, legitimizing negative feelings, brainstorming positive actions that we can take to improve our self-efficacy, self-esteem, and self-care, and even self-compassion, like Eric was talking about earlier. Second, mattering and belonging really combined this identity anchors with social networks. So this is where we want to make students feel unique and valued, help them build connections, and encourage feelings of value, mattering, and connection and belonging. Third, we have mentorship, which connects really the social networks with the crafting normalcy. And here it's recognizing the importance of mentors when crafting normalcy and utilizing our networks. So connecting students with both faculty, peers that can be mentors to them, helping them develop positive mentoring relationships, recognizing, because in that process, they can recognize that failure and challenges are normal and can even be helpful when we're reaching our best potential. And finally, we talk about reframing and reorienting. And this involves encouraging students to see their experiences and struggles as normal, while also reorienting themselves towards new challenges and utilizing the skills that they developed in the past to move forward with focus and efficacy in the future. And so this was less on brainstorming productive actions, kind of distinguishing from the finding strengths, and more on cognitively reframing to see that they're not alone in their struggles and can get through them. So we base our discussion for the rest of the time here on these different supportive processes of finding and reflecting and finding strengths, mattering and belonging, mentorship, reframing, and reorienting. And through that, we'll offer some strategies and activities that you can bring to your classroom to develop these feelings and processes.
Great, thank you, Kelly. So I'd like to touch a little bit on reflecting and finding strengths, and we kind of see two different avenues to do that. The first of those is through personal development. So we gave a couple examples just at the beginning of this webinar, right? So we did a mindfulness exercise that was brief. It was less than 3 minutes. And really that incorporated some of those elements of self-compassion as well. And so how do we help individuals who are being pulled in a lot of different directions really develop that self-awareness, that mindfulness of where their attention is, and then help them be more self-compassionate when things are going maybe not the way they want them to? Additionally, with self-advocacy, this is something that we sometimes think of those individuals demonstrating the greatest amount of resilience as those ones who are standing on the top of the mountaintop by themselves and they've overcome so many challenges. And really, we want to reconceptualize that as when we start thinking of developing resilience, it's reaching out. And how do we help individuals, especially students early in their career, really start thinking about how can I advocate for myself? How can I ask for resources? How can I ask for support? How do I put myself out there so that I can start developing those skills that are going to be helpful not only later on in the course of the career, but then as you go through and engage starting in your professional career as well. Additionally, the second part of this reflecting and finding strengths is really thinking about identity formation. I'm sure we all know that one student who came into college and knew exactly what they wanted to do and progressed through their pathway, and they ended up being that. But for the vast majority of our students, that's not what's going to happen. And so we really want to start thinking about how do we craft different exercises, different activities that can help them really think about what is their larger purpose? What could they be doing with their life? What do they want to be doing? What really drives them? What makes them passionate? How do we help them find their values that are really going to drive those decisions, help them think through their goals and set those goals, and then help them to really just craft their identity as they move through this very formative experience moving forward. So we have some examples for what that looks like. So the mindfulness exercise we gave earlier, that's a really good example of a self-compassion exercise technique. But we also know that mindfulness can be done in a lot of different ways. Probably the one that's most common is just mindful breathing. We did that slightly in the webinar. There's other things like mindful walking, mindful exercise, mindful eating. And this is really just trying to eliminate those external distractions so that we can begin to build that self-awareness and think about, what are we doing? What are we giving our attention to? And what does that mean for repercussions down the line? Some things that we've done in our class are things like gratitude practices. This could be like a gratitude journal that's daily. This could be a gratitude letter that you write and you can send to someone who's really impacted your life. The cool thing about that gratitude letter is research has shown it's beneficial for the letter writer, but it's also really beneficial for those individuals who receive that. And so if we do have that gratitude letter writing experience, we really encourage you to have them, if they feel comfortable, sending it to that person who really impacted their life, because that can be a force multiplier as they go through. Some other things, thinking through of positive affirmations. What kind of things can I tell myself when challenges arise? Because we know challenges are going to arise. Meditation, which some students really enjoy, some students don't, but even just giving them those initial opportunities to practice something that they probably would never practice in their own life, to see them develop those skills as they go through. And then another piece of that mindfulness is just a quick body scan of, how does my body feel? Where is it carrying tension? And then can I actively release that tension? That can be really positive, both from a physical, but a psychological lens as well. In addition, one of the activities that we really like to do is a core values exercise. And I really like this picture because our core values ideally would be driving almost everything that we're doing. And so if you look at this visual, you'll notice that, a lot of these things are on here a lot: openness, respect, trust, honesty. And so one of the activities that we do in our class is we give them an activity sheet like this, and we ask them to identify 10 different values. Now, we probably don't have time to walk through our 10 different values in this activity, but what I'd like you to do is I just like to give you maybe 15, 20 seconds and identify 3 of those values that really stand out to you in your current position. What are the values that drive you, drive your decision making, and hopefully those align with you, what you're doing in your job. But take 15, 20 seconds. And if you have time, if you would be willing, just throw those in the chat. See if we can get a few people who would throw their 3 values in that chat. So the 3 that I really identify with are growth, collaboration, and family. And those values really drive so much of what I do. Collaboration with Kelly on this book and our other projects with my other collaborators is just so much more rewarding with the things that I do than the things that I do in isolation. My family is a critically important piece of what I'm doing as I move forward and making decisions about what job opportunities I want to do, whether it be a new project or those types of things. And then growth is a really nice element to think through of, how am I consistently improving? If I'm challenging my students to improve, how do I keep moving forward? Now, in class, to try to get students to start thinking about which of these are most valuable, it's a pretty uncomfortable situation for them, is they move from those 10 that they first identified, and I ask them to eliminate 5 of those. So they are left with 5 different values. A lot of people are hesitant to this. They say all 10 are really important, but it makes them kind of conceptualize, why did I pick those 5? What really 5 make the most sense to my own life and my own position at this time? And it helps them almost conceptualize what that means to them as they go forward. Now, once they have those 5, I ask them to eliminate another 2. And so they're down to 3. And again, more pushback comes because if 5 were good, why are we eliminating 3? But again, this process really pushes them to think through of what is most important in your life and what is driving your behavior. And then finally, I ask them to eliminate 2 more, so they're left with 1 final value. It's sometimes the elimination down to 1 is actually easier for some than others, because they say, well, this one, as I was conceptualizing it, really is at the center of everything I do. But a lot of them still really struggle of eliminating those 3. And it's really important to phrase it in that way of not just select 1 of your 3, but you're eliminating 2, because that really makes them think through of which of these may not fit my life at this time the most saliently at this moment, right? And so really going through that process helps them start thinking about what values do I have, which is maybe is something that they've never had to do before. What kind of values are most important to me? And then how am I living according to my values? If I say it's family, but I'm never with my family, what does that mean about my mismatch? And how can I reorient my life? How can I make some changes so that I'm now working towards those values moving forward? So those are just a few sample activities, and I'm going to hand it over to Kelly to go through some belonging activities.
Thanks, Eric. So as we think about belonging and mentorship as elements to consider, especially as it relates to creating that sense of mattering and also support, we talk a lot about building social connection and community within the classroom. And this can involve being supportive, creating opportunities to cultivate a sense of belonging for our students, offering opportunities for mentorship, both amongst peers as well as with you as a faculty member, or helping them to find other faculty members and or trusted adults on campus that can be mentors to them. This can involve communally coping. So how do we help our students work together to cope with challenges that they're experiencing, perhaps on something as simple as a group project, or if something more tragic happens on campus, how do we come together to cope and come up with strategies to get through trying times? Also, community involvement and service learning are a great opportunity here, where we can feel a connection beyond ourselves and with the community, and also enact support with others outside of the classroom. So I'm going to talk through a few activities that I like to do in my classroom and that the students tend to really enjoy. Some of these take up a little bit more time, and others are just more strategies that we can incorporate. So first, the peer belonging panel. I like to use a peer belonging panel in my classrooms, and the focus here is on having peers and older peers who have been through situations before come into the classroom to talk about issues related to social connection. If we talk about social connection here specifically, then this becomes very much a belonging intervention. If younger students are able to see that their senior peers have also had times of loneliness, homesickness, difficulty finding their place, but can show that growth and where they've gone over the course of their time in college, the younger students can really begin to develop this idea of, well, I can do that too. And so research shows that these interventions can really be helpful in terms of future sense of belonging, not only through college, but also in terms of their success in career later on in life. Another riff on this would be, if you don't have the time necessarily to devote, is to have students at the end of your class period. And if you can look up to the screen, you'll see these are different note cards. Often at the end of a course, I will have my students share advice for future students in the classroom. And so I will hold on to these note cards, and then I will pass them out to the students who enter the classroom the next semester. And so they're getting little tidbits on what they can do. This could be to get through the class. This could be about college in general. So some of the ones on here, these were actually what I wish I knew. These were seniors giving these to freshmen, but you could do this in any iteration that you felt relevant. Keep tangible or written evidence of good things, words of affirmation, life memories, lessons you don't want to forget. Another person said, what I wish I knew: get more involved, find your passions. And they gave some examples of ways to do that. Another said, enjoy the journey and don't stress too hard. It's all leading you to bigger and better things. And so these were really, again, based on seniors to first year students, But I also like to do this in a way that gives students advice for a specific course. So sometimes on those, you'll get things like, make sure you study for the exams, or go to the professor's office to talk about your projects. And oftentimes the students, even though you could say those things in your syllabus, you could say those things every single week, when they hear it from another student, they're like, I better do that. Another thing to consider in our classrooms is our social support. Now, this is not us claiming that professors and instructors need to be counselors, but if we're familiar with different types of support, we're better able to offer it to our students. And sometimes I like to say the best thing that we can do for our students is to ask them, how can I be supportive to you? But we have emotional support. This can just simply involve listening to our students when they come to our office or when they talk with us after class. Sometimes they let on a little bit more struggle than maybe we're listening for. And so just walking through campus with them on our way to our next class to let them know that there's somebody to listen can be really helpful. Second, tangible support. Helping them with study skills, helping them with time management, the things that are really going to focus on the problem. Third, informational support. We can do this through their peers, offering advice, like I just mentioned with the note cards. But we give emotional support quite often, but sometimes our students don't necessarily recognize that that's what we're doing. But we can inform them on places that they can go on campus for help, inform them of the resources available to them. We can offer them advice on how to use Canvas or Blackboard, or how to find the best classes if we're going through advising. And so information support we're engaged in quite frequently. And the last one that I want to touch on is esteem support. And this is really validating our students. And this goes a long way. We should really try to point out what students are doing right, as well as what needs improvement. We can validate their performance when they're doing well. We can thank them for their engagement in a class time, so that they recognize that their own self-efficacy, their own competence, and even begin to raise their self-esteem if they feel like they need it. So I just wanted to introduce social support because this is less an activity and more just a way of being in our classroom to offer this supportive environment.
Awesome. Thanks, Kelly. I'm going to go through kind of the last area that we're going to touch on in the webinar, and it's really trying to think through of how do we reorient and reframe these students. I think sometimes, especially students who have gone through a lot of challenges as they've come to the academic environment at the college level, they may not really think that was that big of a deal. They just made it through them. And so if we can help them to start reflecting on what they've overcome and the skills that they've developed through those challenges, we can start thinking about how we can use those skills when additional challenges or new challenges come up, whether they be very similar or something very different. Additionally, we want to start thinking about how do we think about resilience at a community level? How can we start thinking through, these big problems that are going to be coming up, things like that one person's going to solve, things like climate change, things like racial inequities. Those types of things are not going to be solved by a single person. And so how do we start thinking about how do we introduce resilience at that community level? And with these problems, we know that they're very stressful, they're very challenging, they're very time consuming, and they're very draining, right? And so if we're thinking about that community resilience, then we also need to start thinking about how do we make sure that our well-being is central to those aspects as well. And so thinking through of what can we do to start them thinking about what are work-life balance, what does that really look like? What are real things that we can be doing to engage those barriers, engage those things that are going to keep us so that we can keep engaging in those activities moving forward. So I just want to touch on one activity quickly, really thinking about that resilience life transfer. And so it's one thing that I do in my classes. I teach a sports psychology and an exercise psychology course. And so one thing that I have them do is I have them create a resilience timeline. So in this, I have them think through of what are the most significant challenges that they've had up until this point. And for some, it's, things that maybe we would externally say aren't that big of a deal. I got a C in one of my classes and it really shook my foundation, right? But for some students coming in this classroom, it's things like I moved 5 times before I was age 7 because we were having home instability, or my mom lost her job and we had to really struggle, and I had to work in high school and overcome that, and so my grades weren't the best. And so one thing about this that I really like is you learn a lot about your students and the things that they've overcome to get to this point. Sometimes we think of students being this homogenous group sitting in our classrooms, and they've all had such diverse challenges and experiences up to this point, that one thing I really like about this activity is it gives you a kind of a glance at what that is. And you may not understand fully what they are bringing in the classroom, but it gives you a better idea of how they show up and the challenges that they're facing. With this, so they identify 5 or 6 different challenges that they've overcome up to this point. And then in addition to just identifying those, I really want them to think through of who helped them in those types of situations, how they help them. So we're introducing some of those social supports. And then I want them to think about what kind of things they did to overcome those challenges. What skills did they use? What resources did they use? And really start thinking about, you've overcome challenges. So we're helping them to build those competencies, that efficacy of overcoming challenges, but we're also identifying what they might need in those situations. So what kind of social support might you need in future situations? And we're helping them think about what kind of skills they developed at this time that they're going to be able to use as they move down the line. And so this resilience timeline really serves a few different functions. One, it gives us a better understanding of our students. 2, it helps them build some efficacy for overcoming challenges. And again, it's not to evaluate one person's challenges or better or more elaborate than the other, but just that they've overcome challenges to get to this point. And then lastly, starting to think about what they might be able to use from overcoming those previous challenges to really overcome challenges in the future, which is a really nice way of thinking about, there are going to be challenges, and how am I going to approach those as I move forward? Really reframing those stressful experiences that we know are going to come in the college environment, and now thinking about, what resources do I have? What strategies can I use? What social supports can I leverage to overcome those challenges that we know are going to come in that college environment? And I'll hand it over to Kelly for the final piece.
Thanks. Another riff on that activity might be that we can have students at the end of the class reflect on their major projects or the course in general. And a simple online reflection that says, what was the biggest thing you learned in this course or through this project? What was your biggest challenge? And how can you overcome those types of challenges based on what you learned? And so we can also show them, kind of allow them to reorient, like, this class was really hard or this project was really tough, but what did I learn from it that next time, because I'm probably going to have to do this again unless I'm graduating. But even then, I'm going to have to do this in my future. What can I do to overcome that? And so you can kind of do mini versions of that as well. One last thing to consider for your courses is always, I think, using case studies. Case studies can go across different content, but we feel that case studies can really help with this idea of reframing and reorienting, because they help us to create empathy and encourage reflection with our students. It encourages normalization based on kind of experience that other students or other characters in these cases have had. And so if it's the same as what we've experienced, perhaps we can, empathize and really learn how we might support this individual or this character. But if it's not, it does help normalize things that might come up in our future. It can also help enable reorientation and reframing through brainstorming, alternative thinking, and alternative action. What could this character have done differently? And that could be in any field, right? If we see somebody struggling, if they're building a bridge and something went amiss, what might they have needed to do differently? Or if they're in a relationship and the relationship fails, what were some things that you saw along the way that produced challenges for the couple, and how might they have reoriented? This could be about personal identity and structural inequity, and how we could create policy and change. So there's just so much you can do with case studies. And I know Kendall Hunt has a lot of case study books that you can choose from across different disciplines. And so I really highly recommend using the case study approach. In our book, we do have case studies at the beginning of each chapter. These are very short, so you can see that they wouldn't take a lot of time. But again, another thing I like to sometimes do is have students in my courses create case studies so that they can also tell a story, be creative, think from a different perspective, and really showcase a challenge as well as overcoming it across different disciplines and fields. So we hope that today we've given you some ideas for ways that you can incorporate resilience-based practices into your classroom across fields, across content, and really creating a supportive classroom environment is important for helping our students flourish. I think most of us are here because we want to see our students thrive. And sometimes that involves challenging our students, pushing them hard, and recognizing that we can be supportive and we can offer moments of self-care, self-compassion, advice, and reflection so that they can really build toward this idea of thriving and being resilient. And so really focusing on the value of activity and case-based learning for encouraging connection and reflection. Team-based work can really be an exceptional way to create a sense of belonging in the classroom. I know that I've had groups that have ended up being friends for life after participating in a semester-long group project together. The importance of including diverse voices and normalizing challenges within our classrooms, and that can be through different panels, bringing in peers, but also kind of voicing our own experiences as well, and enabling our students to voice theirs. And if they're not the student that's always raising their hand and ready, using technology, using Padlets, and other such note cards, whatever suits your fancy, to get the students who aren't as willing to speak up in class to speak. And we'll end with creating a yet culture. Our students don't know that they can do things sometimes. And so when we can say, you're right, you don't know how to do that yet, or it's not perfect yet, maybe never will be. Perfection, it's, the killer of all things productive. But if we can get our students to recognize that although they might not understand or know or do things yet, that doesn't mean they can't in the future. And so creating this culture of care, creating this culture of resilience in our classrooms can really help to build our students toward that idea of, yes, I can do this, and I have the support systems behind me that will help me to do this. So with that, we've mentioned our book a couple of times, The Journey into College and Career, Cultivating Resilience Across Challenges. And this book really is intended for college students reading and thinking about a lot of these different concepts and topics throughout the chapters of the book. So kind of going through more personal and individual development to the more social, and then finally the more community level resilience. And much of what we talked about today is taking the instructor-based lens on the things that we're hoping to help our students cultivate in their own lives through this book. So if you're interested, I know Megan just posted the link, and we are looking forward to any questions that you might have for us today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. And I did see we had a question in the Q&A about which book was that case study from? And yes, it is from this book that Eric and Kelly wrote, Journey into College and Career, Cultivating Resilience Among Challenges. So I did put that link in the chat just now. Also, when you guys close out of the webinar, it will redirect to that page. So that's really nice and convenient. So if anyone has any further questions, please feel free to throw them in right now. A question that we do have for you guys is, we know that resilience challenges are really, really rampant right now. As you guys are teaching these classes, what are you seeing are some of sort of the top struggles that arise? What are some common themes that you notice?
I'll take it first, I suppose. I think a couple of things. My students right now, especially post-COVID, are extremely interested in belonging in this and creating a sense of belonging. And I feel that a lot of students struggled to really find their place, to find connection when they were kind of forced into online learning. And I mean, as we all did, right? And so I feel that a lot of the students are kind of struggling to find their way back. How do I kind of get my social self back, my, spread those social wings again? And so I think that can be a big challenge. I think also balancing work and school and life. I think time management comes into play there as a big challenge. Finances come in as a big challenge there. And of course, this depends on the university that we're at and the students that we're working with. But I know that here, we have a lot of students that are paying their own way, and they have to work a lot, and they're working 40-hour weeks while also going to school full time. And then we're encouraging social connection and all these other things that they're like, where's their time for that? And so that's why incorporating some of the little things into the classroom where they can interact with others, or they can take a moment to have some mindful breathing. They're like, oh, okay, I can do this in my classroom. I don't have to do this on my own when I don't have time. And so those are some of the challenges that I really see. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, I would echo all of those. I think the belonging piece I think is especially relevant. Just thinking of when a lot of our students were in COVID too. I mean, these students who were in college were anywhere from like eighth grade to junior year in high school, and just thinking about those formative experiences of making really dumb mistakes with friends that you could learn from. They didn't really have that because they were stuck in their home, maybe with a parent or a family. And so I think just giving them the time in class to connect is a super important piece. I would say the only other thing that I would really add is the digital well-being that we all have. I mean, I can say from my own space, it's really easy to grab a phone and eliminate that connection opportunity. And so just modeling that, bringing awareness to that of how many times do you think you're grabbing your phone? How many times do you think you're doing those types of things that are eliminating those opportunities? And we're never going to live in a world without them, right? Technology can be a really wonderful tool for a lot of things, but just trying to get them to think through of, you may be overstressed because you are working, and that's balancing things. But when you have a free hour, are you using that hour, or is it being gobbled up by the Instagram algorithm? And how can we be more deliberate with our time so that even when you are overwhelmed, when you're stressed because you have a lot of things and you're working, you're doing schools, and some of our students also have families they're balancing as well, how do we help them utilize the times that they do have and really prioritize that as they move forward?
Yeah,
And with
I
the
love
social
that.
media, yeah, with the social media piece, I would say also just the high levels of social comparison right now, and not being enough. And so instilling that sense of mattering and instilling that sense of, you are enough, you belong, you're here. But recognizing who they're comparing themselves to. I teach a class on social media in relationships, and I had them pull up their influencers. And I felt bad about myself after walking around the room and seeing who my students were looking at day in and day out for hours a day. And they've logged their use, and it's upwards of 10 hours a day of being on social media. And so when you're looking at not just looking at social media to connect with your family or your friends, but you're looking at social media to just scroll, and that's what can be the most dangerous. And actually, there's a chapter in the book on digital wellness and presence. But that scrolling and seeing all of these bodies that don't look like ours, and all of these people who have all the time in the world to focus on all of the things that are going to make us the best version of ourselves, but then we're like, but I have to go to class or I have to go to work. And that social comparison is can be really detrimental. But the loneliness piece is big. You could talk to any counseling center, and I venture to guess that they're going to say a big chunk of especially their first year students are coming in because they're lonely. And loneliness is not something that requires counseling from a counseling center. And our counseling centers are really, really busy right now. And so if we can help the counseling centers by creating a sense of connection in our classroom, maybe that's going to help combat a little bit of that loneliness. And a few students are going to be more equipped to find support and find connection without feeling like they need to go to the counseling center.
Yeah, and I would add, I think what you said, Kelly, is awesome. And so sometimes we hear about these challenges, and I think especially the people who are on these type of webinars and looking for these types of things for students, we think of like, what can I do? I'm so overwhelmed right now, and we have to consider our own well-being as well. And so really thinking about how do I create the space in my classroom where they can connect with peers, I think is a really big piece, because it's not necessarily, you don't have to connect with every single student. For some professors I know are upwards of 200 people in a classroom sometimes, right? And so not putting that onus on you directly, but thinking about how can I create that space in my classrooms where my students can connect with each other and build that social support within their networks, so that you are indirectly influencing that by not putting all of the onus on you to have to connect with every single student.
Yeah, those are great. I love those. I feel like they also bring about sort of like another natural question. Some of these strategies that you guys are talking about, they're so incredibly powerful. Like, the belonging, the connection, all of those things. But I feel like they're also very kind of counter to, sometimes we pick up our focus like the path of least resistance, right? But it ends up being, it's the path of least resistance, but then it ends up being so draining. And so are there any of these strategies that you find that maybe you encounter a little bit of resistance with in the classroom when you initially bring them up, just because they are kind of counter to what's easiest? And then how do you empower students to say, okay, this might not be the easiest apparent choice, but it's going to be so much better for you in the long run?
I think one thing that I try to do, and I will say just a lot of my classroom activities are very group focused, and that is not the norm of a lot of other faculty or the norm of the college environment, right? Especially as they're going through classes that have 200, 250 people, they're probably not doing a lot of group stuff. And so one thing I say, and I try to normalize that, is this is going to feel uncomfortable for a while, right? This is not the norm of what you're doing, but these are the reasons why, and these are the potential benefits of it. And so being really transparent that this is going to be uncomfortable. This is going to be something that's unusual that you may not like right away, but I want you to give it some time. And I feel like that's a nice way of normalizing that, yeah, those feelings that you're having are a little uncomfortable because it's not what you're used to. And just because it's not what you're used to doesn't mean it's bad, but it's something that's going to be different. And we have to try to almost cue them into, this is the feelings you might have. This is the reason you're having it, but these are the potential benefits. And so trust me as I go through it. I think the experience Kelly had of the notes, I do something very similar. And sometimes I'll have students say something like, the group work at the beginning was so overwhelming and I hated it, but now I have some of the best friends I have. And so bringing those voices back in, so it's not just a single voice at the front of the room, but it's a voice from the past who used to be up here, right? They were sitting in that classroom, I think can be really powerful in helping them engage in those uncomfortable experiences.
Love that.
I think also it's important for us as instructors to really reflect on how we're teaching and the strategies that we're using, because every student has different, learning styles. And so, I had students, of course, that were really resistant to wanting to do the group work, or, at the beginning of the semester, I had them create a fake social media profile. And so they can kind of talk about a goal that they like, a little bit of something about themselves, and then a goal that they have for the semester. And that could be a personal goal, a goal in the classroom, whatever. And then we can readdress if they reach those goals. But so we do an online kind of meet and greet where they can read each other's profiles and chat like they would on social media. But then we have an in-person meet and greet. And I had a lot of students that were like, that was really uncomfortable. And I was like, wait, you talk to people every day. Why is that uncomfortable? But they find their one person that they're comfortable with. And so mixing up the groups when you do group work, I think can be important, because they find the two people next to them that they're really comfortable with, and then they never branch away from that. I made them like walk around the room, right? And actually introduce themselves to people and talk about what they saw in their profiles and things like that, so that they could see the difference between social media interaction and face-to-face interaction. And that was really uncomfortable for some of them, who felt a little bit more introverted. And so we also want to consider, if I'm always asking people to call out and speak up, and it is more personal reflection, which is another thing students can be kind of uncomfortable with. Well, if you're uncomfortable with personal reflection, tie back to the readings, be able to make it more kind of incorporate more of the content. And others are willing to divulge a lot, right? And so you do get kind of a bounty of experiences there. But I think that mixing up the groups, and I think that mixing up our styles. So for some it's more visual, for some it's more audio, for some it's being able to do things. Some people just want to listen to a lecture, and so reflecting on our own teaching strategies to recognize kind of how are we teaching students in these different ways. And that's why I love case studies so much, because it just adds another element to our arsenal of teaching that can also help create empathy and help students reframe and practice these strategies that in their own life are going to build resilience.
Yeah, those are amazing. And I want to thank you guys again for being here with us today and just sharing your wealth of knowledge. And if anyone's listening today and this is really resonating with you and you're like, oh my goodness, I want to incorporate these things into my classroom, but I'm feeling really overwhelmed and I just don't feel like I have the bandwidth to be able to put time into sitting and figuring out the exact hows for how to do that. I really just have to again just plug Eric and Kelly's book because it is just it is just a wealth of information when it comes to building resilience in wellness in the transition to college, identity formation, resilience in personal development, resilience in social relationships, and then also like society, and then carrying resilience into the future too. It really kind of approaches it from just a multitude of facets. So can't plug that enough. But I want to thank you everyone again for your time today. This will be recorded and it is, or has been recorded. We'll be sending that out to you in the coming days. Again, Eric and Kelly, thank you so much today. It was really, really a pleasure to spend this hour with you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for having us. We appreciate it.
And thanks
Yeah,
for everybody who came
absolutely.
on.
Yeah, thank you for coming, everyone.
Yeah. All right. Thanks everyone and have a wonderful afternoon.